Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments here in Israel, throughout the region and beyond, with chief focus on the Gaza Strip, Judea and Samaria, as well on the Syrian theater, it's always important to remember how the war began. 441 days ago, on October 7th of last year, the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates in the Gaza Strip launched an abhorrent attack on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping some 250 people, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 100 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. With that, I'd like to turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, CIA Director Bill Burns leaves Qatar after it seems that they reached a certain deadlock in the current round of negotiations. What can you tell us about that?
Indeed, Jonathan, it's a deadlock rather than a deadline. And it's very unfortunate because, in the media business, they usually say that good news is no news. For the general population, it's the other way. No news is good news because when you have a headline, it's usually about some bad event. But in this case, the fact that after being so anxious to get some good news ahead of the holidays, Christmas and New Year's Eve, the fact that Director Burns, as well as some of the other senior officials who have been to the region recently, Secretary Blinken, Mr. Brett McGurk, General Kurila of CENTCOM, they all came in expecting to close the gap, bridge the several outstanding issues between Israel and Hamas through the mediation of Qatar and Egypt, and with American pressure, perhaps with some Turkish help. It seems as if it was to no avail, at least not yet. And therefore, the focus is still on the fighting, as you mentioned, on all fronts. One notable event is that the Kfir Brigade in the Gaza Strip managed to destroy 3 underground systems of 7.5 kilometers, which means that after 14 months, the IDF is still finding a lot of targets above or underground in Gaza. It's a work in progress and probably will remain so.
Indeed. Just to put things a little bit in perspective, we won't go into the entire list of details with regard to the negotiations that are currently taking place, and there are plenty of reports about that. Nevertheless, just to point one thing, Marwan Barghouti, who is one of the individuals, arch-terrorist, currently incarcerated in an Israeli jail since 2002 for 5 consecutive life sentences over the responsibility for heinous crimes, including the murder of countless of Israelis, is someone that the Islamist Hamas demands to be released, among a long list of hundreds upon hundreds of additional terror operatives in Israeli jails with blood on their hands. So just to put things in perspective to our viewers, this is not an easy negotiation. Israel needs also to consider the consequences of releasing such individuals and what may happen thereafter. They're not going to stop their terror aspirations to eradicate the state of Israel after being released. So these negotiations are, of course, very crucial in order to find the right formula, and there is no good formula. It's the lesser of all evils, if I may call it that. But let's turn to elsewhere in central Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Amir Aivi. the head of the IDSF, the Israel Defense Security Forum, known in Israel as Habitchonistim. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to hear your perspective to this. What should Israel do within this context? Of course, we know that ongoing efforts to apply pressure on Hamas in the Gaza Strip are yielding additional operational successes, some tactical successes, but in broad terms, 100 of our citizens are still in Hamas captivity in the darkest subterranean infrastructures throughout the Gaza Strip.
I think that the challenge throughout the war is how Israel can manage to reach all three goals of war: to eradicate Hamas as a governmental and military entity, to bring back all the hostages, 100 hostages, and also to create the terms in Gaza that never again there will be a terror army endangering the South or the citizens of Israel. And Israel must reach all goals. It cannot give up any goal, or it will endanger the whole Israeli society. I think that we don't know what's going on really behind closed doors in this negotiation, but we do know that one reason for some optimism about the deal is the fact that Hamas is now in a completely different situation. Hezbollah is out of the equation. Syria is out of the equation. The Shia axis is falling. We see now that the IDF is moving more and more units from Lebanon to Gaza. Division 98 arrived in the last days in Gaza and is preparing for its next operations. The pressure on Hamas will be huge as Division 98 also enters the fight. And Hamas knows they have until the 20th of January. If they don't do a deal before that, they really cannot know what expects them afterwards, the day there is a change in the administration. So I think that we are seeing now the last weeks of the negotiation. Hamas is trying to get some more success in the negotiation, and it's hardening. But I want to be optimistic and hope that in the next 2-3 weeks before the next administration will see a deal. It will be extremely stupid for Hamas not to do so. And if they won't do so, they will pay the price. They will pay the price because the pressure will enhance and the attack will be strong. And I think they will be in an existential threat until a moment that they will have no choice but to have some deal and maybe get out of Gaza to the Sinai Peninsula. So it's true that at this moment it seems like there is a setback, but I'm still somewhat optimistic. A very different sense than what I felt in the last few months when it was obvious that Hamas doesn't at all want any deal.
Indeed. Thank you, General. Also joining us from elsewhere in central Israel is Brigadier General in Reserve, Doron Gavish, the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense. It's good to see you as well, General. I'd like to ask you particularly on 2 points that General Aivi mentioned. First, of course, as President-elect Donald Trump mentioned, unless all hostages are released, not part, all hostages are released, there will be hell to pay. Throughout the Middle East, he didn't necessarily speak about Hamas. He speaks also about its patrons throughout the region, including the Islamic Republic of Iran, according to what I'm hearing in Washington. And then within that context, the Iranians are, of course, still ongoing, pushing for ongoing efforts to confront Israel from separate fronts, including, of course, from the proxy in Yemen, Yahya Sarria, the spokesman of Ansar Allah, which is dominated by the Houthi tribe, announced that they launched, after Israel struck in Yemen, yet another projectile. What can you tell us about that? And it seems like they're repeatedly lying about many details. So how about you clear for us a little bit the air with some truth?
Well, with regard to the coming administration, I believe that the statements they made by Mr. Trump, this is also something that is probably a consideration of the Hamas and its behavior. And I really hope that we wouldn't have to wait to Trump administration to start its term, and the hostages would be back in Israel even before. For the Yemen arena, well, it is interesting, Jonathan. We could say that this is basically the only left arm of the octopus, which the head of it is, of course, Iran. Lebanon is not, or Syria, or the Hezbollah is not there anymore as a real threatening arm toward Israel. Syria are not there at all. We see also other proxies which are weakening, and the Houthis are still continuing with their military attempts toward Israel, toward the United States assets, and other within the Gulf. The big question is, are they going to be deterred after the next or after the last actions that both Israel and United States and the coalition did in the last week or more? It's a big question. Unfortunately, until now, we can't say that they were deterred. We have to remember that the Houthis shot toward Israel starting only from November. We're talking about something like 7 projectiles and more than 7, I would say, ballistic missile defense, and another 10 plus minus projectiles that were shot toward our area. The vast majority of them, of course, intercepted. Unfortunately, the last one that was shot toward Israel was intercepted only as a mission kill, but not a warhead kill, and the consequences were seen in a school in the middle of Israel, in a city named Ramat Gan. And looking on the devastation that was done there in this school, you could only imagine what would be happening if we wouldn't intercept the other 15 ballistic missiles that were shot toward Israel from Yemen in the last or during the war, and then, as I said, another 6 of them from last November. Probably the answer would be the change of strategy. And the change of strategy could be done toward Yemen, or could be done toward Iran, the head of the snake. And when I'm talking about change of strategy, we talked here about it, and we mentioned here more than once the 4 pillars of our strategy: the attack and denying the capabilities of our enemies even before they are being shot toward Israel, our alert capabilities, intelligence ones, and also alert the civilians, the active defense with kinetic means, and the passive defense with the order that are being issued by the Home Front Command. And you combine all of them, and still we have a very low number of casualties here in Israel. The main question is, what about the offense pillar? And the question is there, and I think that we already see a change in the strategy, both from the Israeli side and both from the US side. Is it enough? It's a question, but I believe that if the Houthis would continue, they would feel the arm of both Israel, United States, and the coalition. I think the decision was made. As you said, they are telling themselves and others all kinds of stories, at least on their capabilities to attack Israel. But we have to remember that they are still influencing the naval routes, and this is something that must be taken care of.
Mr. Oren, Yahya Zaria, the spokesman of Ansar Allah, time and again said that this terror group, the Houthis, will only seize their belligerence toward both the state of Israel as well as the freedom of navigation in the strategic Strait of Bab el-Mandeb and the adjacent waterways once the war in Gaza and the war in Lebanon come to a halt. Now they focus once again on the Gaza Strip since there is a ceasefire in Lebanon. But we heard yesterday the outgoing U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, at the Council on Foreign Relations, coming out and stating he casts doubt on whether the Houthis would stop, even after a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, since it brings them to the forefront of the international headlines and their masters in Tehran don't necessarily have an interest for that to stop, even if a ceasefire in Gaza is achieved. So, in that context, what are we to expect?
Well, if they are so unpredictable, we can't expect any specific consequence one way or the other. But if this is their condition, let them put pressure on Hamas to soften their terms, and there will be a ceasefire, and the Yemenites can go back to their camels or whatever pleasures they have over there. And one should emphasize that these ballistic missiles and these drones that are being launched from almost 2,000 kilometers away are causing indiscriminate damage. They are not aimed at military targets in Israel. They can hit anywhere and do. Before that school was devastated in Ramat Gan, one of the drones hit an apartment building in another town, Yavne. And you know, the school, which was devastated, was not too far away from Israel's major hospital, which is named Sheba, a very similar name to Shifa in Gaza. When the IDF had to take action in and around Shifa because Hamas was there, there was an international outcry. But in the Sheba hospital in central Israel, there are thousands of patients and staff all day and all night. They could have been hit. The Yemenites and their patrons wouldn't mind. So this should be pointed out that the Houthis, even though they claim to take part in a sort of a flanking move for either Hamas or Hezbollah, are hitting innocent civilians.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. Well, the double standards of the international community during this war have come wide open into the media, into a lot of various spheres, and unfortunately, take Ireland, for example. On the day that Israel decides to close the embassy in Ireland, the Irish open an embassy or discuss about the opening of an embassy in Iran. There are a lot of shifts. There are a lot of very unfortunate events taking place on the international stage. And on that, General Aivi, I'd like to ask you particularly, since we hear UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres coming out and saying that Israel needs to immediately withdraw from the demilitarized zone of the 1974 Armistice line. On the same time, we're hearing also allies such as the foreign minister of Germany, Annalena Baerbock, coming out and saying that Israel should withdraw and cease the strikes on various munition storage facilities and other munitions of strategic capacity that may threaten the state of Israel. We're hearing others around Western capitals saying the same. And I'm baffled. It comes at a time when Turkey is amassing vast amounts of troops. It controls territories in northern Syria far greater than the small strip of land in which Israel is currently deployed to ensure the security not only of the residents of the Golan Heights, but the national security interests of Israel and the residents of the Golan itself on the Syrian side of that border.
I think that if there is one thing we learned in this war, is that Israel needs to do what it needs to do to defend the people of Israel. And I think that talking about Syria, nobody knows where this is going, just as nobody could have predicted that Syria will fall in a few days. Nobody can predict where all this is going. Big parts of these forces, Sunni forces, are very, very radical. They are aligned with ISIS, with Al-Qaeda, with Jabhat Nusra, Muslim Brotherhood. And it's completely unclear what will happen in the coming days and months in Syria and beyond. And we don't know what will happen with the Turks, whether they will invade Syria or be more proactive. In this, I would say, almost chaotic situation, Israel must defend itself. It must make sure that it is able to defend itself, creating a perimeter on the other side. We know that in this very complex situation, UN forces won't be effective. We've seen that also in Lebanon. And this is why both in Lebanon and in Syria, Israel has moved its forces forward, creating a perimeter that can really secure the Golan Heights and the citizens in this area. We've experienced the 7th of October. We don't want to experience ever again such a reality. And therefore, I think we should do what's best for us and not listen to people who advise us how to defend our citizens.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a little baffled by the fact that there are reports about Barbara Leaf, the Assistant Secretary of State for the Middle East, coming to the region in order to engage with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, including its leader, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, at a time when many of his operatives of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, an al-Qaeda affiliate since 2013, prior to which, since its establishment in 2012 to 2013, it was actually affiliated to the Islamic State. Many of those operatives in Hayat Tahrir al-Sham still carry the insignia of Islamic State, and when people ask them about that, they say, no, it's our prayer, it's our call to prayer, la ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, and the whole story of that, and start stuttering about it. But nonetheless, many of them are, as you mentioned, affiliated both Al-Qaeda and Daesh, and that is something that the West just cannot accept, period. There is no sugarcoating it. But General Gavish, are there security threats of potentially a conflagration, possibly within the context of what's happening in Syria, despite the so-called calming remarks by Muhammad al-Julani about prospects of escalation vis-a-vis Israel?
Well, I fully agree with my colleague Amir Aivi. I think that there is a big question mark where this thing is going to turn. What would be the strategy? How this collective different terrorist organization, what would be exactly the structure of it? What would be their strategy? What will be their policies and so on? This is something that we would have to probably wait and see. And as long as things are moving on, Israel have to be very, very focused on its own interest. And this is why I fully support what is being done by Israel. And you mentioned, Jonathan, this is also something that we all the time see, the hypocrisy of the international community. While Turkey is there, Turkey is attacking the Kurds, Turkey is inside of Syria, and everyone is talking about Israel and the DMZ zone to defend itself. It is quite amazing. So going back to the main understanding of us as an Israelis, that we must do whatever we need to do in order to defend ourselves. So it's a big question. But I believe that the major question that have to be asked is really Iran. Iran, and once again, Iran. This is the head of the snake. Iran today is weak. If we compare it, of course, for a year ago and even more than that. And I think that I hope that the international community would focus on Iran, its behaviors, and deny for it for sure to reach any mass of weapons of mass destruction. And this should be our focus for the next coming months, years. I believe that this is where everything starts, everything ends, and this should be the focus.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to hear a closing sentence from each and every one of you, very briefly, since we have run out of time, and we do have still one remark. General Aivi, we'll start with you. Go ahead.
Well, I think that, we're facing a very, very defining moment. I'm really looking forward to the beginning of the presidency of Donald Trump. I feel this will bring a new reality to the Middle East and American leadership and proactivity. And I think this coming months ahead, we'll see big changes in the course of the war, hopefully bringing down the Shia axis and paving the way to peace agreements. So many things can happen in the coming years, and I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be very exciting.
Absolutely. General Gavish?
Well, from the Israeli perspective, I think that we should look toward the south and really hope that things would come to a point that we could get a settlement, an agreement that all the hostages would be back in Israel. This is something super important when we're looking at our own values. This is something that we own to them, to the families, and to us as an Israelis to bring them back to Israel.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Oren, very briefly, of course, we are going out into our holiday season, Christmas, New Year's, and therefore Mr. Oren will be here for twice a week, TV7's Israel at War updates, just to keep you updated during this season. Nevertheless, we won't broadcast TV7 Israel news or our other productions during this time, so just keep that in mind. You can get updates on what program airs via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. Mr. Oren, last sentence from you.
For more than 65 years now, there has been a very interesting interplay between the three non-Arab regional powers in the Middle East, Iran, Turkey, and Israel, and this is being played out today again in Syria.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I'd like to immediately thank General Aivi, General Gavish, and Mr. Oren for all of your insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home again. And from me here in Jerusalem, wishing you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year until our next editions from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
Jerusalem Studio, now available on Spotify.